So we are starting the Civil War in France's first draft, part two of our sessions on these. We did not actually bother to upload the first part because, well, it was interesting history, lots of French, and, you know, treason and bourgeois interests and politicking and all sorts of nonsense. These guys were the quintessential bourgeois, quote unquote, democratic politicians, compradore, and all of that. That's really all you need to know. They were Bismarck's men within the Paris Commune, or rather within France generally. There's all these different organizations and people and so on and so forth. And Marx is focusing on some particular individuals, both in terms of generals and politicians and so on and so forth. But these guys were all in cahoots. Ultimately, the thing to remember is that the ruling class in any given nation isn't really attached to their own nation. They never have been. They understand that if the people rise up, then they are better off resting with a foreign ruling class as the same as them coming in, destroying the people's movement, and then they come back into their own position as compradore, rather than allowing the actual class struggle to come to fruition. These people will, in fact, collaborate. That's just a fact of the matter. And anybody who's thinking that there's some sort of national identity that both the bourgeoisie and the proletariat are connected to, and oh no, the bourgeoisie, they would never act in a treasonous manner in order to stop the workers' revolution. They've lost their goddamn minds. It's happened over and over again. Only have to look at the global south. And it doesn't have to be the global south, it's in any nation. But that's all that's really been said so far. We will see if we get anything in terms of the dictatorship of the proletariat from Marx and Engels' perspective. So, let us get started. We are in the section on tiers, like the city, I think. The different fractions of the French bourgeoisie had successfully their reigns. The great landed proprietors under the Restoration, the old Bourbons. The capitalists under the parliamentary monarchy of July, Louis Philippe. While its Bonapartist and Republican elements kept rankling in the background. Their party feuds and intrigues were of course carried on pretext of public welfare, and a popular revolution having got rid of those monarchies, the other set in. All this changed with the Republic, February. All the fractions of the bourgeoisie combined together in the party of order. That is, the party of proprietors and capitalists, bound together to maintain the economic subjugation of labor and the repressive state machinery supporting it. Reminder that the party of order's main slogans were family, faith, the regular conservative stuff. Family, faith, public order, all that stuff that people like to talk about whenever they're saying that these damn kids are destroying everything because they, are kind of living a little bit different. Instead of a monarchy, whose very name signified the prevalence of one bourgeois faction over the other, a victory on one side and a defeat on the other, the triumph of one side and the humiliation of the other. The Republic was the anonymous joint stock company of the combined bourgeois fractions, of all the exploiters of the people clubbed together. Indeed, Legitimists, Bonapartists, Orleanists, bourgeois Republicans, Jesuits, and Voltairians reminder that Jesuits were a Catholic branch, more or less, embraced each other, no longer hidden by the shelter of the crown, no longer able to interest the people in their party feuds by masquerade them as struggles for popular interest, no longer subordinate to one another. Direct and confess antagonism of their class rule to the emancipation of the produced masses. Order, the name for the economic and political conditions of their class rule and servitude of labor. This anonymous or republican form of the bourgeois regime, this bourgeois republic, this republic of the party of order, is the most odious of all the political regimes. Its direct business, its only raison d'etre, is to crush down the people. It is the terrorism of class rule. The thing is done in this way. The people, having fought and made the revolution, proclaimed the republic and made room for the National Assembly, the bourgeois, whose known republican professions are guaranteed for their quote-unquote republic, are pushed on the foreground of the stage by the majority of the assembly, composed of the vanquished and professed enemies of the republic. The Republicans are entrusted with the task to goad the people into the trap of insurrection, to be crushed by fire and sword. So this is more history from the 1950s era, wherein essentially they were trying to push for a state of siege to be justified by getting people to take to the streets and fight back. So they did all sorts of stuff that they fully were aware were odious in order to justify the suspension of their constitution, among other things. It did not work at that time because the working class was organized enough in order to discipline itself and understand what was coming if they actually fought out at that time. They were nowhere near prepared for it. Continuing. This part was performed by the party of the National and Commune at the head of the revolution of February by the June insurrection. By their crime against the masses, these Republicans lose then their sway. They have done their work, and if allowed to support the party of order in its general struggle against the proletariat, they are at the same time displaced from the government, forced to fall back in the last ranks, and only allowed on sufferance, quote unquote. In other words, they are the fall guys. Nobody likes them. Everybody hates them. But they are the fall guys. That's a regular thing within bourgeois politics. Like Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi, they go in and they say, "Oh well, I don't agree with this," so they're out there. But every time, if these people ever get pushed out, then somebody else will take their place. They're there in order to be the focus when everybody else is, of course, counting on them to stop any actual movement by the people. The combined royalist bourgeois then become the father of the republic. The true rule of the party of order sets in. The material forces of the people being broken for the time being, the work of reaction, the breaking down of all the concessions conquered in 4 revolutions begins piece by piece. The people is stung to the madness not only by the deeds of the party of order, but by the cynical effrontery with which it is treated as the vanquished, with which in its own name, in the name of the Republic, that low lot rules it supreme. Of course, that spasmodic form of anonymous class despotism cannot last long, can only be a transitory phasis. It knows it has seeded on a revolutionary volcano. On the other hand, if the party of order is united in its war against the working class, in its capacity of the party of order, the play of intrigue of its different factions, one against the other, each for the prevalence of its peculiar interest in the old order society, each for the restoration of its own pretender and personal ambitions, sets in full force as soon as its rule seems secure, guaranteed, by the destruction of the material revolutionary forces. This combination of a common war against the people and the common conspiracy against the republic, combined with the internal feuds of its rulers and their play of intrigues, paralyzes society, disgusts and bewilders the masses of the middle class. Footnote. Throughout this document, the term middle class should be read as bourgeoisie, i.e., the capitalist class, both large and small, rather than understood in the modern usage of middle class, meaning professional and small business people as opposed to big capitalists. Back to the text. And, quote, troubles business, keeps in a chronic state of disquietude. All the conditions of despotism are created, have been engendered under this regime. But despotism without quietude, despotism with parliamentary anarchy at its head. Then the hour has struck for a coup d'etat. The incapable lot has to make room for any lucky pretender, making an end of the anonymous form of class rule. This is, for example, Donald Trump, right? Like the joke that is bourgeois parliamentary politics, wherein you got this anarchy of politics where, oh, well, we're one bourgeois faction and another bourgeois faction, they're fighting against one another. More and more people just get disgusted and more problems crop up, and then eventually, they're incapable of doing anything, and some pretender walks up and says, hey, I'm in charge. And what's up, Fiona? There are no page numbers, but you can watch my stream. Well, you can read with me on this. Oh, in a physical book, I'm assuming? Gotcha. We're about a third of the way through under the tiers section. THEIRS. Yes, this is the first draft. No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then you won't be able to find that. Okay. No, this is drafts, chapter 1, right here. Here's the section that we're on. Okay. Anyway, so what was I saying? Right. Parliamentary democracy or something like it is the most effective for the bourgeois mode of production because it allows the differing bourgeois factions to peacefully work out their differences. There's all sorts of factions within the bourgeoisie. Some, they like tariffs. Others don't like tariffs. Some are financiers. Some are industrialists. Some are commercial. And this also leads out with other things. Where was that? I've completely lost the phrase. There's something that I was. Okay. So basically, right, all these different things are in conflict and so on and so forth. But it is all within the agreed class interests they have of suppressing the working class, because that's the basis for all of their existence. Some of them want to do different things with that suppression, though, and a parliamentary structure is the most effective way for it to do that in general. Under certain circumstances, that ceases to be the case, and when that is the case, without hesitation, the bourgeoisie will retire a democratic bourgeois rule. No hesitation whatsoever. Continuing. In this way, Louis Bonaparte made an end of the bourgeois republic after its 4 years of existence. During all that time, Thiers was the tool of the party of order, that in the name of the republic made war upon the republic, a class war upon the people, and, in reality, created the empire. He played exactly the same part as he played then, now as he played then. Only then but as a parliamentary intriguer, now as a chief of the executive. Should he not be conquered by the revolution, he will now as then be a baffled tool. Whatever countervailing argument government will set in, its first act will be to cast aside the man who surrendered France to Prussia and bombarded Paris. Thiers had many grievances against Louis Bonaparte. The latter had used him as a tool and a dupe. To note for anybody who's unfamiliar, this is talking about Louis Bonaparte III, a fool of a man who bumbled around and essentially acted as a populist once you get down to it with his name and his history, and then was uplifted for very cynical reasons. The peasants identified with him because he made all sorts of promises. The pays bourgeois, basically everybody but the big bourgeois identified with him and put their own class interests reflected back at them, even though he didn't share any of their class interests, just like Donald Trump, right? If you'd followed the previous readings on the class struggles in France, this is documented pretty well as well there, and quite funnily at that. Continuing. Sorry. Thiers had many grievances against Louis Bonaparte. The latter had used him as a tool and a dupe. He had frightened him, shocked his nerves, by the arrest after the coup d'etat. He had annulled him by putting down the parliamentary regime, the only one under which a mere state parasite like Thiers, a mere talker, can play a political part. Last but not least, Thiers, having been the historic shoeblack of Napoleon, had so long described his deeds as to fancy he had enacted them himself. The legitimate caricature of Napoleon I was in his eyes not Napoleon the Little, but Little Thiers. With all that, there was no infamy committed by Louis Bonaparte, which had not been backed by Thiers, from the occupation of Rome by the French troops to the war with Prussia. Only a man of his shallow head can fancy for one moment the Republic with his head on its shoulders, with the National Assembly half legitimists, half Orleanists, with an army under Bonaparte's leaders, will, if victorious, not push him aside. There is nothing more grotesquely hard than the Tom Post affecting to play acting the part of Timur Tamberlane. With him, the deeds of cruelty are not only a matter of business, but a thing of theatrical display, of fantastical vanity. To write his bulletins, to show his severity, to have his troops, his strategy, his bombardments, his patrolling bombs, to hide his cowardice under the cold-bloodedness with which he allows the December's blacklegs to take their revenge on Paris. This kind of heroism is exaggerated baseness. He exults in the important part he plays and the noise he makes in the world. He fancies to be a great man. And how gigantic he is. He, the dwarf, the parliamentary dribbler, must look in the eyes of the world. In the midst of the hard scenes of this war, one cannot help smiling at the ridiculous capers Thiers' vanity cuts. And Thiers is a man of lively imagination. There runs an artist's veins through his blood, and an artist's vanity able to gull him into a belief in his own lies, and a belief in his own grandeur. Through all the speeches, bulletins, etc. of Thiers runs a vein of elated vanity. All right. That fruit to blood. French. The hideous tribulate, a tragic buffoon in Victor Hugo's Leroy Smuse. Okay. Splendid bombardment with petroleum bombs from Mont Valérien destroyed a part of the houses with turns within the rampart, with a grandiose conflagration and a fearful thunder of cannon shaking all Paris. Bombs purposely thrown into turns and the Champs-Élysées quarters. Explosive bombs, petroleum bombs, yet these are notes. All right. It looks like we're finally getting into what is potentially what we are looking for: dictatorship of the proletariat. The Commune. The glorious British penny a liner has made the splendid discovery that this is not what we used to understand by self government. Of course, it is not. It is not the self administration of a town by turtle soup guzzling aldermen, jobbing vestries, and ferocious workhouse guardians. It is not the self administration of the counties by the holders of broad acres, long purses, and empty heads. It is not the judicial abomination of the great unpaid. Footnote: a nickname for the unpaid magistrates and justices in England. It is not political self government of the country through the means of oligarchic club and a reading of the Times newspaper. It is the people acting for itself by itself. All right. First, a little bit. Nice. Within this war of cannibals, the most disgusting, the literary shrieks of the hideous known seat at the head of government. The ferocious treatment of the Versailles prisoners was not interrupted one moment, and their cold-blooded assassination was resumed so soon as Versailles had convinced itself that the Commune was too humane to execute its degree of reprisals. The Paris Journal at Versailles says that 13 line soldiers made prisoners at the railway station of Clamart were shot offhand, and all prisoners wearing the line uniform who arrive in Versailles will be executed whenever doubts about their identity are cleared up. M. Alexandre Dumas, Fils, tells a young man exercising the functions, if not bearing the title, of a general, was shot when having marched in custody a few hundred yards along a road. So footnote: Le Mot d'Ordre, a left-wing Republican daily newspaper under the editorship of Henry Rochefort, was founded on Paris on February 3rd, 1871. It was banned by Joseph Benoit, governor of Paris, on March 11 and resumed publication from April 8 to May 20th, 1871, during the period of the Paris Commune. The paper sharply criticized the Versailles government and the monarchist majority in the National Assembly, but never sided completely with the Commune. It was opposed to the Commune's measures of suppressing the counter-revolutionaries in Paris. Back to the text. That particular publication wrote that, according to La Liberté, published in Versailles, all the soldiers of the regular army who were found at Clamart among the insurgents were shot on the spot. By Lincoln tears, Lincoln acknowledged the belligerent rights. These are the men denouncing on the walls of all the French communes of Parisians as assassins, the banditti. Desmaret. Deputies of the Commune went to Bicêtre, where they visited the only April 27, where they visited the only survivor, seriously wounded, Schaffer, to inquire about the 4 National Guards of the 18th Infantry Battalion of the National Guard. And we got a bunch of French and a footnote. The report on the investigation by a Commune Commission into killing of the National Guards was published on April 29th, 1871 in the... Oh, I see. So he's quoting a thing. Quote: the wounded man said that on April 15th, but note again, correct date was April 25th. I'm sorry, Fiona, I'm doing my best. At Belle-Epine, near Villejuif. My French is amazing. He and 3 comrades were attacked by cavalrymen who told them to surrender. As it was impossible to put up effective resistance against the forces which were surrounding them, they threw their arms to the ground and surrendered. The soldiers surrounded them and took them prisoner without using violence or threats. They had been prisoners for several minutes when a cavalry captain came and rushed at them, revolver in hand. Without a word, he fired at them and killed him. In the same way, he shot at the guard Scheffer, who received a bullet in the chest and fell beside his comrades. Terrified by this foul attack, the other 2 guards drew back, but the frenzied captain rushed at them and killed them with 2 revolver shots. After these atrocious and base acts, the cavalrymen retired with their chief, leaving their victims lying dead on the ground. New York Tribune outdoes the London papers. And there is a footnote. Yes, French is based entirely on the vibes. That's absolutely the case. The New York Daily Tribune was an American newspaper published in 1841 to 1924 versus the organ of the left wing of the American Whig Party before the mid-50s and later that of the Republicans. Marx's contribution to the newspaper covered the period between August 1851 and March 1862. In fact, however, Engels most rose to the articles in the period at Marx's request. During the reactionary period in Europe, Marx and Engels made use of this widely circulated progressive paper to make a factual exposure of the maladies of capitalist society. During the American Civil War, Marx completely severed connections with the paper chiefly because the forces advocating compromise with the slave owners had increased in the editorial board and the paper had departed from its former progressive stand. Later, the paper turned further right. Back to the text. M. Thiers, quote, most liberal and most freely elected National Assembly that ever existed in France, end quote, is quite of a piece with his, quote, finest army that France ever possessed, end quote. This senile chamber introuvable, chosen on a false pretext, consists almost exclusively of legitimists and Orleanists. The municipal elections, carried on under Thiers himself on the 30th of April, shows their relation to the French people. Of 700,000 councillors, in round numbers, returned by the 35,000 communes still left in mutilated France. 200 are legitimists, 600 Orleanists, 7,000 avowed Bonapartists, and all the rest are Republicans or Communists. And there's a footnote here. This refers to supporters of the Commune. This is evidenced by Versailles Cour Daily News, 5th May. Is there any other proof wanted that this assembly with the Orleanist mummy Thiers at its head represents a usurpatory minority? Paris. M. Thiers represented again and again the Commune as the instrument of a handful of convicts, of ticket of leave men, of the scum of Paris, and this handful of desperados holds in check for more than 6 weeks the finest army that France ever possessed, led by the invincible MacMahon and inspired by the genius of Thiers himself. The exploits of the Parisians have not only refuted him, all elements of Paris have spoken. Quote, one must not confuse the movement of Paris with the surprise attack on Montmartre, the latter being only the cause and the starting point. This movement is general and goes deep into the consciousness of Paris. Even the majority of those who, for one reason or another, keep aloof do not deny its social legitimacy. End quote. Who says this? The delegates of the syndical chambers, men who speak in the name of 7,000 to 8,000 merchants and industrials. Footnote. Marx quoted the address of the delegates of the chamber syndicales from La Rappel newspaper. They've gone to tell at Versailles, the League of Republican Union, the demonstration of the Freemasons, etc. And there's another footnote. The Ligue de l'Union Républicaine pour les droits de Paris, French, was a bourgeois organization founded in Paris in early April 1871. Its aims were peacefully to abolish the Paris Commune and end the Civil War, and tried to do this by mediating between Versailles and Paris, proposing that the two sides reach agreement on the basis of recognition of the Republic and the municipal freedom of Paris. The demonstration of the Freemasons was staged by Paris Freemasons on April 29, 1871, in front of the city fortifications, demanding that Versailles troops cease military actions. In order to win the sympathy of the middle and petty bourgeois Republicans, the Commune received the representatives of their political viewpoint, the Freemasons, at the Hotel de Ville on April 26 and 29. The Freemasons declared their support of the Commune during the two meetings as their proposal for a ceasefire had been rejected by tiers. Their demonstration in front of the fortifications took place after the interview of April 29th with the participation of a delegation from the Commune. Back to the text. The province. The provincial rogues. If Thiers fancied one moment that the provinces were really antagonistic to the Paris movement, he would do all in his power to give the provinces the greatest possible facilities to become acquainted with the movement and, quote, its horrors. He would solicit them to look at in its naked reality, to convince themselves with their own eyes and ears of what it is. Not he. He and his defensemen tried to keep the provinces down, to prevent their general rising for Paris by a wall of lies, as they kept out the news from the provinces in Paris during the Prussian siege. The provinces are only allowed to look at Paris through the Versailles camera obscura. Only the lies and slanders of the Versailles journal reach the apartments and have any validity there. Pillages and murders by 20,000 ticket of leave men dishonor the capital. Quote, the League considers its first duty to clarify the facts and restore the normal relations between the provinces and Paris, end quote. As they were when besieged in Paris, thus they are now in besieging it in their turn. Quote, as before, lying is their favorite weapon. They suppress and seize the capital's newspapers, intercept communications, sift the letters, so that the provinces can only get the news which Jules Favre, Pickard, and company are pleased to give, and there is no way to verify the truth of what they say. End quote. Thiers' bulletins, Pickard's soucrières, Defar's the placards in the communes, the Felon press of Versailles and the Germans, the Petit Moniteur. Footnote. This refers to the Moniteur des Communes, a French government newspaper published in Versailles during the period of the Paris Commune. It appeared as an evening supplement to the Journal Officiel of the Thiers government. Back to the text. The reintroduction of passports for traveling from one place to another. The army of mouchards spread in every direction. I don't know what mouchards are, but okay. Arrests in Rouen, etc., under the Prussian authority, etc. Les milliers de the thousands of police superintendents scattering round Paris received an order from the prefect gendarme Valentin to seize all newspapers, whatever their shade, printed in this insurgency, and burn them in public as was done at the height of the Holy Inquisition. Thiers' government first appealed to the provinces. Footnote. The manuscript above the words first appeal to the provinces is the following. Turned to the provinces with an anxious appeal before it had obtained an army of captives from Bismarck. Back to the text. Thiers' government first appealed to the provinces to form battalions of National Guards and sent them to Versailles against Paris. The province, as a Journal de Limoges, footnote, refers to La Défense Républicaine, a French Republican paper published in Limoges in 1871, says, showed its discontent by refusing the battalions of volunteers, which were asked, I guess Fiona just couldn't stand it anymore, which were asked from it by Thiers and his Rourocs, the few Breton idiots, fighting under a white flag, every one of them wearing on his breast a Jesus heart and white cloth and shouting, Vive le Roi, are the only provincial army gathered round Thiers. The elections on Vinger 6 May. Footnote. This evidently refers to Levingier's comment on May 6, 1871 on the result of the election to the Municipal Council of April 30, 1871. Back to the text. In Defer's press law, 8 April, confessedly directed against the, quote, excesses of the provincial press. Then the numerous arrestations in the province. is placed under the, quote, law suspects. Sorry, not quote, but law suspects, which was passed on February 19th, 1858 by the Corps Legislatif, vested with the emperor and the government with unlimited authority to mete out punishment to people suspected of being hostile to the Second Empire. Under this law, people could be jailed or banished to any part of France or Algeria, or even expelled altogether from French territory. Nice. Intellectual and police blockade of the provinces. April 23rd, delegates. I'm sorry. The municipal council has dispatched 3 of its members to Paris and Versailles with instructions to offer mediation, with the view of terminating the civil war on the basis of the maintenance of the Republic and the granting of municipal franchises to whole France. War at any price was their answer. Then the petition of the Lions delegate presented to the Assembly by the Geppo on April 24th. There's a footnote. It demanded that the civil war be stopped in Versailles and negotiate peace with Paris. It also proposed to clearly limit the authority of the Assembly and the Paris Commune and restrict the Commune's activities within the area of municipal questions. Back to the text. The municipalities of the provincial towns committed the great impudence to send their deputations to Versailles in order to call upon them to grant what was demanded by Paris. Not one commune of France had sent an address approving of the act of tiers in the rurals. The provincial papers, like these municipal councils, as Defer complains in his circular against the conciliation to the Procureur General. Quote, put the assembly born of universal suffrage on the same footing with the pretender Paris Commune. Reproach the former with not having accorded Paris its municipal rights, etc. End quote. And what is worse, these municipal councils, for instance, that of Auch, quote, unanimously demand of it to propose immediately an armistice with Paris, and that the assembly chosen on the 8th of February dissolves itself because its mandate has expired, end quote. It ought to be remembered that these were the old municipal councils, not those elected on 30th April. And there's a footnote. This refers to municipal councils elected in 1865 under the pressure of the government of the Second Empire. Back to the text. Their delegations so numerous that Thiers decided no longer to receive them personally, but address them to ministerial subaltern. Lastly, the elections of 30 April, the final judgment of the Assembly and the electoral surprise from which it had sprung. If then the provinces have till now only made a passive resistance against Versailles without rising for Paris, it is to be explained by the strongholds the old authorities hold here still. The trance in which the empire merged and the war maintained the province. It is evident that it is only the Versailles government, army, and the Chinese wall of lies that stand between Paris and the provinces. If that wall falls, they will unite with it. It is most characteristic that the same men, Thiers et Co., who in May 1850 abolished by a parliamentary conspiracy, Bonaparte aided them to get them into a snare, to have them at his mercy, and to proclaim himself after the coup d'etat as the restorer of the universal suffrage against the party of order at its assembly. The universal suffrage, because under the Republic it might still play them freaks, are now its fanatical adepts, make it their quote-unquote legitimate title against Paris, after it received under Bonaparte such an organization as to be the mere plaything in the hands of the executive, a mere machine of cheat, surprise, and forgery on the part of the executive. And we have a footnote here. La Ligue des Villes, an abbreviated name for the La Ligue Patriotique des Villes Républicaines. The League was planned in April through May 1871 by the bourgeois Republicans who were afraid of the resurgence of a monarchy after the defeat of the Paris Commune. because, in order to defeat the Paris Commune, the bourgeoisie, of course, allied with the monarchists. The bourgeoisie will always ally with the most reactionary forces possible whenever a, you know, anti-reactionary movement steps up. That's just the thing. That's obvious. Um, but not to liberals. Its provisional committee, with the active participation of the League, decided to hold a Congress of Delegates of the Municipal Councils at Bordeaux on May 9th, 1871, to find ways to end the Civil War, consolidate the Republic, and formally establish a League. After the Versailles government banned the convening of the Congress, the Provisional Committee stopped its activities. On May 6, 1871, the League published the program of the abortive Congress of the Ligue des Villes. Back to the text. Eesh. We've gotten one small paragraph, which had no actual informational content in any way. It basically just said that the commune was the people acting for itself by itself, as opposed to these other things. But didn't talk about how that's the case. Hopefully, we will get more. And soon. Okay. Trochu, Jules Favre et Tiers Provincials. It may be asked how these superannuated parliamentary mountebanks and intriguers like Thiers, Favre, Defarge, Guenier Pages, only strengthened by a few rascals of the same camp, continue to reappear after every revolution on the surface and usurp the executive power. These men that always exploit and betray the revolution shoot down the people that made it and sequester the few liberal concessions conquered from former governments, which they oppose themselves. The answer is very simple. In the first instance, if very unpopular, like Thiers after the February Revolution, popular magnanimity spares them. After every successful rising of the people, the cry of conciliation, raised by the implacable enemies of the people, is re-echoed by the people in the first moments of the enthusiasm at its own victory. After this first moment, people like Thiers and Defarge eclipse themselves as long as the people hold material power and work in the dark. They reappear as soon as it is disarmed and are acclaimed by the bourgeoisie as their file leaders. Or, like Favre, Guenier Pages, Jules Simon, etc., recruited by a few younger ones of similar stamp, and Thiers himself after the 4th of September. They were the quote-unquote respectable Republican opposition under Louis Philippe, afterward the parliamentary opposition under Louis Bonaparte. The reactionary regimes themselves have themselves initiated when raised to power by the revolution, secure for them the ranks of the opposition, deporting, killing, exiling the true revolutionists. The people forget their past, and the middle class look upon them as their men. Their infamous past is forgotten, and thus they reappear to recommence their treason and work their infamy. I'm actually going to take this. This is not necessarily directly important, but excuse me, is important in the sense that what is necessary in the dictatorship of the proletariat. It's not to fall for this shit, right? Obvious. What are the reason that these people rise to power? Well, number one, this conception of conciliation with previous class enemies, right? There can be no conciliation. These people need to be kept from politics. They need to be kept out of power. The second is, again, this conciliation, this class collaboration. Oh, hey, these liberals, they were against Donald Trump, right? So that means that they can be trusted at the levers of power. No, they can't. Obviously, they can't. What the hell are you talking about? And yet, this magnanimity persists. So we need to be on the lookout for it. The only people, once the state changes hands, once the bourgeoisie is smashed and a proletarian one is created, of course, essentially, because the bourgeoisie lose their capacity to wage class war in a direct manner against the working class, because they no longer have the state in their control, they have to swap over to a different method of going about it, one from the shadows. They have to speak in revolutionary terms and stuff like that, but have counter-revolutionary content to confuse and misdirect and those sorts of things. Continuing the text. Night of 1 to 2 May, the village of Clamart had been in the hands of the military. The railway station in those of the insurgents. The station dominates the fort of Issy. By surprise, their patrols being let in by a soldier on guard, the watchword having been betrayed to them. The 23rd Battalion, footnote here, 22nd Battalion actually, of chasseurs got in, surprised the garrison, most of them sleeping in their beds, made only 60 prisoners, and bayoneted 300 of the insurgents. In addition, line soldiers were afterwards shot offhand. Thiers, in his circular to the prefects, civil and military authorities of May 2nd, had the impudence to say, quote, "The Commune arrests generals only to shoot them and institutes a committee of public safety which is utterly unworthy." End quote. Troops under General Lacretelle took the redoubt of Molin-Saquet, situated betwixt Fort Issy and Montrouge, by a coup de main. The garrison was surprised by treachery on the part of the commandant Galien, who had sold the password to the Versailles troops. 150 of the Federals bayoneted and over 300 of them made prisoners. And Thiers, Times correspondent, was weak when he ought to have been firm. The coward is always weak so long as he has to append danger for himself, and firm when everything was to be gained by some concessions. The rascal is always firm when the employment of the material force bleeds France, gives great airs to himself, but when he personally is safe. This is his whole cleverness. Like Anthony, Thiers is an honest man. So, yeah, just regular stuff. Oh, these people do these terrible things. Well, no, they really don't. And also, you're going in and engaging in massacres. Every accusation is a confession with these people. That's always been the case. Back to the text. Thiers' bulletin über on Molin-Saquet, quote, "Deliverance of Paris from the dreadful tyrants who oppress it. Versailles men disguised as National Guards. Most of the communards were asleep and were killed or captured in their sleep." Pickard. Our artillery does not bombard. It's true it shells. It's all the same, when America bombs countries. Oh, it's not carpet bombing. It's guided missiles, right? Blanqui shut up dying in a prison cell. Florence hacked to pieces by the gendarmes, and Duval shot by Vinoy held these people in their hands on October 31st, and nothing was done to them. So, in other words, these various communards had prisoners of war and did nothing to them. They were fine. But when these people were made prisoners of war, they were hacked to pieces and shit like that. Back to the text. And I think that we are actually getting into the good stuff. Hallelujah. The Commune. Part 1. Measures for the working class. Night work of journeymen bakers suppressed. 20th April. The private jurisdiction usurped by the seigneurs of mills, etc., manufacturers, employers great and small, being at the same time judges, executors, gainers, and parties in the dispute. That right of a penal code of their own, enabling them to rob the laborers' wages by fines and deductions as punishment, etc. Abolition public and private workshops. Penalties impended on employers in case they infringe upon this law. Fines and deductions extorted since the 18th of March to be paid back to the workmen, April 27th. Sale of pawned articles at pawn shops suspended, March 29th. A great lot of workshops and manufactories had been closed in Paris, their owners having run away. This is the old method of the industrial capitalists, who consider themselves entitled, quote, by the spontaneous action of the laws of political economy, end quote, not only to make a profit out of labor as a condition of labor, but to stop it altogether and throw the workmen on the pavement, to produce an artificial crisis whenever a victorious revolution threatens the, quote, order of their system. The Commune, very wisely, has appointed a communal commission in which, in cooperation with delegates chosen by the different trades, will inquire into the ways of handling over the deserted workshops and manufactories to cooperative workmen's societies with some indemnity for the capitalist deserters. This commission has also to make statistics of the abandoned workshops. In other words, the revolution succeeds, the capitalists flee rather than continue their own managerial work. But apparently, we can't go on strike ourselves. They can go on strike. We can't. But anyway, Commune has given order to the maires to make no distinction between the femmes called illegitimate, the mothers and widows of the National Guard, to the indemnity of 75 centimes. The public prostitutes Sonel kept for the men of order at Paris, but for their safety kept in personal servitude under the arbitrary rule of the police. The Commune has liberated the prostitutes from this degrading slavery, but swept away the soil upon which, and the men by whom, prostitution flourishes. The higher prostitutes, the cocottes, were of course under the rule of order, not the slaves, but the masters of the police and governors. In other words, the not concubines, but the high class prostitutes, the consorts, the geisha. That's not the right term, but basically that they held significant power in a certain sense over the police and the governors, because they could just say, hey, this guy's doing stuff, and they heard all sorts of rumors, all that sort of stuff. Back to the text. There was, of course, no time to reorganize public instruction, education, but by removing the religious and clerical element from it, the Commune has taken the initiative in the mental emancipation of the people. It has appointed a commission for the organization of education, primary, elementary, and professional. It has ordered that all tools of instruction, like books, maps, paper, etc., be given gratuitously by the schoolmasters, who receive them in their turn from the respective maires to which they belong. No schoolmaster is allowed on any pretext to ask for payment from his pupils for these instruments of instruction. Pawn shops. All pawn tickets dated before April 25th, 1871 for articles of clothing, furniture, linen, books, bedding, and work tools worth no more than 20 francs may, beginning from May 12th of this year, be redeemed without a charge. Part 2. Measures for the working class, but mostly for the middle classes. House rent for the last 3 quarters up to April wholly remitted. Whoever had paid any of these 3 quarters shall have the right of setting that sum against future payments. The same law to prevail in the case of furnished apartments. No notice of quit coming from landlords to be valid for 3 months to come. 29 March. Actually, I'm going to scroll up here and just make sure right here. This is of some import. back to the text, sorry. I'm unfortunately out of water. Payment of bills of exchange due, expiration of bills. All persecutions for bills of exchange fallen due suspended. All commercial papers of that sort to be repaid and repayment spread over 2 years to begin next July 15th, the debt not being chargeable with interest. The total amount of the sums due divided in 8 equal portions, payable by trimester. First trimester be dated for July 15th. Only on these partial payments, when fallen due, judicial prosecutions permitted. April 16th. The Defar laws on leases and bills of exchange entailed the bankruptcy of the majority of the respectable shopkeepers of Paris. The notaries, huissiers, auctioneers, bailiffs, and other judicial work officers making till now a fortune of their functionaries, transformed into agents of the commune, receiving from it fixed salaries like other workmen. Right there, that is of import. As the professors of the École de Médecine have run away, the Commune appointed a commission for the foundation of free universities, no longer state parasites, given to the students that pass their examination, means to practice independent of doctor titles to be confirmed by the faculty. Since the judges of the civil tribunal of the Seine, like the other magistrates always ready to function under any class government, had run away, Commune had an advocate to do the most urgent business until the reorganization of tribunals on the basis of general suffrage. So, in other words, these magistrates exist under any class government. Or judges, at any rate. So, it's important to talk about law under the dictatorship of the proletariat. 3. General measures. Conscription abolished. In the present war, every able man, National Guard, must serve. This measure excellent to get rid of all traitors and cowards hiding in Paris. Games of hazard suppressed. Church separated from state. The religious budget suppressed. All clerical estates declared national properties. The Commune, having made inquiries consequent upon private information, found that beside the old guillotine, the, quote, government of order, had commanded the construction of a new guillotine, more expeditious and portable, and paid in advance. The Commune ordered both the old and the new guillotines to be burned publicly on the 6th of April. The Versailles journals, re-echoed by the press of order all over the world, narrated the Paris people as a demonstration against the bloodthirstiness of the communards, had burnt these guillotines. All political prisoners were set free at once after the revolution of the 18th of March, but the Commune knew that under the regime of Louis Bonaparte and his worthy successor of the government of defense, many people were simply incarcerated on no charge whatsoever as political suspects. Consequently, it charged one of its members, Pratat, to make inquiries. By him, 150 people were set free who, being arrested since 6 months, had not yet undergone any judicial examination. Many of them, already arrested under Bonaparte, had been in a year in prison without any charge or judicial examination. This fact, so characteristic of the government of defense, enraged them. They asserted the Commune had liberated all felons. But who had liberated convicted felons? The forger Jules Favre. Hardly got into power, he chastened to liberate Piquantelifier, condemned for theft and forgery in the affair of the Étendard. One of these men, Taillefer, daring to return to Paris, had been reinstated in his convenient abode. But this is not all. The Versailles government had delivered in the Maison Centrales prisons all over France convicted thieves on the condition of entering M. Tier's army. Every accusation is a confession. So this is useful, and also this. They destroyed the guillotines despite claims that they are bloodthirsty, and they set free all the political prisoners, but they did not free the, regular prisoners. Back to the text. Decree on the demolition of the column of the Place Vendôme as a monument to barbarism, symbol of brute force and false glory, an affirmation of militarism, a negation of international right. Footnote. Not a useful footnote. This is a useful thing. They destroyed the old symbols of power of the previous state. Election of Franco, German member of the International, to Commune declared valid. Quote, concerning that the flag of the Commune is that of the Universal Republic, and that foreigners can have a seat in it. And there's a footnote here, quote from the summary of the elected commission of the Commune, which appeared in the Journal Officiel de la République Française. Franco afterward chosen a member of the executive Commune. I wish that I knew who this Frankel was, but it sounds like this German member of the International. Yes, he was a German. This is an important bit. The election of a foreigner into the Commune on grounds of internationalism. The Journal Officiel has inaugurated the publicity of the sittings of the Commune. Decree of Paschal Grousset for the protection of foreigners against requisitions. Never in government in Paris so courteous to foreigners. The Commune has abolished political and professional oaths. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't... I don't think that that's a good idea. Okay, continuing. The destruction of the monument called the Chapel of Atonement of Louis XVI, and that has a footnote, Saint Therese should read Saint Honore. All right. That was a good section. We got lots of useful information there. Part 4. Measures of Public Safety. Disarmament of the loyal National Guards. 30 March. Commune declares incompatibility between seats in its ranks and at Versailles. Decree of reprisals. Never executed. Only the fellows arrested. Archbishop of Paris and Cure of the Madeleine. Whole staff of the College of Jesuits. Incumbents of the principal churches. Part of these fellows arrested as hostages, part as conspirators with Versailles, part because they tried to save church property from the clutches of the Commune. Quote, the monarchists wage war like savages. They shoot prisoners, they murder the wounded, they fire on ambulances, troops raise the butt end of their rifles in the air and then fire traitorously. Proclamation of the Commune. Footnote. This is the Journal Officiel de la République Française. Back to the text. In regard to these decrees, the reprisals to be remarked. In the first instance, men of all layers of Paris society, after the exodus of the capitalists, the idlers, and the parasites, have interposed at Versailles to stop the civil war, except the Paris clergy. The Archbishop and the Cure de la Madeleine have only written to tears because averse to, quote, the effusion of their own blood, in their quality as hostages. Secondly, after the publication by the Commune and the decree of reprisals, of taking hostages, etc., the atrocious treatment of the Versailles prisoners by Beatrice Lambs and Valentin's gendarmes did not cease, but the assassination of the captive Paris soldiers and National Guards was stopped, to set in with renewed fury so soon as the Versailles government had convinced itself that the Commune was too humane to execute its decree on the 6th of April. Then the assassination set in again wholesale. This is very familiar, actually, with what is going on in Israel and Palestine, wherein essentially, as soon as Hamas did not actually go through with the executions, which it didn't, the bombings continued. The Commune did not execute one hostage, not one prisoner, not even some gendarme officers who, under the disguise of National Guards, had entered Paris as spies and were simply arrested. Excuse me one second. I'm mostly better, not completely. Back to the text. Surprise of redoubt of Clamart, 2nd May. Railway station in the hands of the Parisians. Massacre. Bayoneting. The 22nd Battalion of Chasseurs, Galifet, shoots line soldiers offhand without any formality. Redoubt of Moulin-Saquet, situated between Fort Issy and Montrouge, surprised in the night by treachery on the part of the commandant Gallion, who had sold the password to the Versailles troops. Federals surprised in their beds, asleep, massacred great part of them. I thought that we had already gone through this. Did it happen again? I don't know. 25th April. 4 National Guards, disconstated by commissaries. So, Lemonades, usually when you enter into a political office, you make an oath of office, right? So, for example, you might make an oath that you will uphold the program or that you will uphold the Constitution. Or if you enter into a doctoral thing, right, you will make oaths of ethics and stuff like that. The removal of political and professional oaths, I don't think is a very good idea. Now, the amount that those oaths can actually constrain people is questionable, but it's a thing, unless they are rewriting the oaths. If they're rewriting the oaths, and that's entirely fine. But just flat out abolishing political and professional oaths is, I don't see a reason for doing so. Really, Rosa? Why so? So, for example, the Hippocratic Oath. You're not affirming loyalty to the Hippocratic Oath. You're exactly. It's in the same league as making an oath to the court that you will not perjure. I think that it's important on an official frame to do so. People perjure in court all the time. Yes, I think that's very important because it creates, number one, from a social standpoint, I think it's important. Number two, from a continuation standpoint, it's important. Number three, in the same vein that we say, did you read the rules or not? Prove it. That is important. Yes, it is, but only because we've only structured it as. And by the way, doctors, for instance, must study medical ethics to become doctors. They do not make You don't make oaths without being educated in their contents, Rosa. Declaration of intent, recognition of need, all sorts of things. You are making a statement that you will follow these. Yes, it's a psychological thing and it's a legal thing and all these other things. Oaths of office and oaths of state and all sorts of other things are, in my opinion, quite important. And I don't think that you can just say, oh, well, why don't you just enforce the medical oaths and stuff like that without anybody ever giving them. Like, you could do that, but there's no particular reason to. I think that there's plenty of reasons to have one, but no reason not to have one. Anyway, we have completely lost the line. Back to the text. Yeah, we can debate this later. Yeah. These men, being surrounded by horse chasseurs under order, unable to resist, surrendered, disarmed, having nothing done to them by the soldiers. But then arrives the captain of the chasseurs, shoots them down one after the other with his revolver. Left there on the soil, chauffeur, fearfully wounded, survived. 13 soldiers of the line made prisoner at the railway station of Clamart were shot offhand, and all prisoners wearing the line uniforms who arrive in Versailles will be executed whenever doubts about their identity are cleared up. Alexander Dumas, Phil's, now at Versailles, tells a young man exercising, we've already read this. We've already read this. Why are we reading this again? Okay. Casimir Bus, appointed president of Commission of Inquiry into doings of the dictators of 4th September, 14 April. What? Private houses invaded and papers seized, but no furniture has been carried away and sold by auction. The houses, properties of Tiers et Co. as traitors trailed, but only the papers confiscated. And there's a footnote, searched. Arrests among themselves. This shocks the bourgeois who had political idols and great men immensely. Quote, it is provoking, however, and discouraging that whatever may be the authority possessed by the Commune is continually changing hands. We know not the today with whom the power may rest tomorrow. In all these eternal changes, one sees more than ever the wanting of presiding hand. The Commune is a concourse of equivalent atoms, each one jealous of another and none endowed with supreme control over the others. Journal suppression. So the bourgeoisie are like, these people need a strong leader. Part 5, the financial measures. See Daily News 6 May, principal outlay for war. Only 8,928 francs from seizures, all taken from ecclesiastics, etc. So, La Commune, the rise of the Commune and the Central Committee. The Commune has been proclaimed at Lyons, then Marseilles, Toulouse, etc. after Sedan. Gambetta tried his best to break it down. Footnote. Following the news of the defeat at Sedan, of the revolutionary outbreak in Paris and the collapse of the empire on September 4th, 1870, workers in many other French cities such as Lyons, Marseilles, and Toulouse staged revolutionary armed uprisings and set up communes as the organs of people's political power. In spite of their short existence, the provincial communes, particularly the one in Lyons, put into effect a series of important revolutionary measures. For instance, they abolished the police bureaucratic apparatus, released political prisoners, introduced secular education, levied a tax on the wealthy people, and gratuitously redeemed pawned articles from pawn shops. The government and national defense ruthlessly suppressed these provincial communes. This is a good summary. I'm just going to seize it. Back to the text. The different movements of Paris in the beginning of October aimed at the establishment of the Commune as a measure of defense against a foreign invasion, as a realization of the rise of the 4th of September. Its establishment by the government of the 31st October failed only because Blanqui, Florenz, and other then leaders of the movement believed in the men of their word, who had given their word of honor to abdicate and make room for a commune freely elected by all the arrondissements of Paris. It failed because they saved the lives of those men so eager for the assassination of their saviors. Having allowed Trochu and Ferry to escape, they surprised them by Trochu's Bretons. Footnote. In the German translation, the sentence reads, "They allowed Trochu and Ferry to escape, and these men then fell upon them with Trochu es Bretons." Back to the text. It ought to be remembered that on the 31st of October, the self-imposed government of defense existed only on sufferance. It had not yet gone through the farce of a plebiscite. Footnote, the revolutionary events of October 31st, 1870 indicated the instability of the government of national defense. To strengthen its position, the government conducted a plebiscite in Paris on November 3rd, 1870. Although a large section of Parisians voted against the government, it won a majority through heavy pressure on the people, demagoguery, and the state of the siege. Back to the text. Under the circumstances, there was, of course, nothing easier than to misrepresent the character of the movement, to decry it as a treasonable conspiracy with the Prussians, to improve the dismissal of the only man, footnote, Francois Tamisier, amongst them who would not break his word, for strengthening Trochu's Bretons, who were for the government of defense what the Corsician Spadassins, desperados, had been for Louis Bonaparte, by the appointment of Clement Thomas as commander-in-chief of the National Guard. There was nothing easier for these old panic mongers than appealing to the cowardly fears of the middle class, in the presence of the working battalions who had taken the initiative, throwing distrust and dissension amongst the working battalions themselves by appeal to patriotism, to create one of those days of blind reaction and disastrous misunderstandings by which they have always contrived to maintain their usurped power. As they had slipped into power the 4th of September by surprise, they are now enabled to give it a mock sanction by plebiscite of the true Bonapartist pattern during the days of reactionary terror. In other words, fearmonger into getting the plebiscite to get them into power, which they couldn't have done before. The victorious establishment at Paris of the Commune at the beginning of November 1870, then already initiated in the great cities of the country, and sure to be imitated all over France, would not only have taken the defense out of the hands of traitors, and printed its enthusiasm on it as the present heroic war of Paris shows. It would have altogether changed the character of the war. It would become the war of Republican France. Hissing, footnote, should be read as hoisting the flag of the social revolution of the 19th century against Prussia, the banner bearer of the conquest and counter-revolution. Instead of sending the hackneyed old intriguer a begging at all courts of Europe, it should have electrified the producing masses in the old and new world. By the escamotage of the Commune on October 31st, the Jules Favre et Co. secured the capitulation of France to Prussia and initiated the present civil war. But this much is shown. The revolution of the 4th of September was not only the reinstallment of the Republic because the place the usurper had become vacant by his capitulation at Sedan. It not only conquered that Republic from the foreign invader by the prolonged resistance of Paris, although fighting under the leadership of its enemies. That revolution was working its way into the heart of the working class. The Republic had ceased to be a name for a thing of the past. It was impregnated with a new world. Its real tendency, veiled from the eye of the world through the deceptions, The lies and the vulgarizing pack of intriguing lawyers and word fencers came again and again to the surface in the spasmodic movements of the Paris working class. And the south of France, whose watchword was always the same, the Commune. The Commune, the positive form of the revolution against the empire and the conditions of its existence, first essayed in the cities of southern France, again and again proclaimed in spasmodic movements during the siege of Paris, and conjured away by the sleight of hands of the government of decrees of defense and Bretons of Trochu. The plan of capitulation, hero, was at last victoriously installed on the 26th of March, but had not suddenly sprung into life on that day. It was the unchangeable goal of the workmen's revolution. The capitulation of Paris, the open conspiracy against the Republic at Bordeaux, the coup d'etat initiated by the nocturnal attack on Montmartre, rallied around it all the living elements of Paris, no longer allowing the defensive men to limit it to the insulated efforts of the most conscious and revolutionary portions of the Paris working class. The government of defense was only undergone as a makeshift of the first surprise, a necessity of the war. The true answer to Paris people to the Second Empire, the empire of lies, was the Commune. Thus, also the rising of all living Paris, with the exception of the pillars of Bonapartism and his official opposition to great capitalists, the financial jobbers, the sharpers, the loungers, and the old state parasites, against the government of defense does not date from the 18th of March, although it conquered on that day its first victory against conspiracy. It dates from the 31st of January, from the very first day of the capitulation. Footnote. J. Where's J? I'm sorry, T. The correct date was 28 January. From the very day of the capitulation, the National Guard, that has all the armed manhood of Paris, organized itself and really ruled Paris from that day, independently of the usurpatory government of the capitulars installed by the grace of Bismarck. It refused to deliver its arms and artillery, which was a property, and only left them in the capitulation because it's property. And then another footnote. German translation of the latter part of the sentence reads, which were its property, had been officially acknowledged as its property in the capitulation and were therefore left to it. In other words, they left the arms and artillery for the Prussians. But, the people refused to cease fighting, and so they took those up. It was not the magnanimity of Jules Favre that saved these arms from Bismarck, but the readiness of the armed Paris to fight for its arms against Jules Favre and Bismarck. In view of the foreign invader and the peace negotiations, Paris would not complicate the situation. It was afraid of civil war. It observed a mere attitude of defense and content with the de facto self-rule of Paris, but organized itself quietly and steadfastly for resistance. Even in the terms of the capitulation itself, the capitulars had unmistakably shown their tendency to make the surrender to Prussia at the same time the means of their domination over Paris. The only concession of Paris they insisted upon, a concession which Bismarck would have imposed upon them as a condition, if they had not begged it as a concession, was 40,000 soldiers for subduing Paris. In the face of its 300,000 National Guards, more than sufficient for securing Paris from an attempt by the foreign enemy for the defense of its internal order, the demand of these 40,000 men, a thing which was beside avowed, could have no other purpose. On the existing military organization, and it grafted a political federation according to a very simple plan. It was the alliance of all the Garde Nationale, put in connection with one of the other by the delegates of each company, appointed in their turn the delegates of the battalions, who in their turn appointed the general delegates, generals of the legions, who were to represent the arrondissement and to cooperate with the delegates of the 19 other arrondissements. Those 20 delegates, chosen by a majority of the battalions of the National Guard, composed a central committee, which on the 18th March initiated the greatest revolution of this century and still holds its post in the present glorious struggle of Paris. Never were elections more sifted, never delegates fuller representing the masses from which they had sprung. To the objection of the outsiders that they were unknown. Later, in point of fact, that they were only known to the working classes, but no old satyrs, no men illustrious of by the infamies of their past, by their chase after pelf and place. They proudly answer, quote, so were the 12 apostles, and they answer by their deeds. All right. So, in other words, I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to go right here. So what happened here, right? The people of France, more specifically the army, refused to capitulate and refused to surrender as their treasonous leaders wanted them to Prussia. And instead, they took over. In all reality, like, their treasonous leadership still stood in place, but ultimately the National Guard took all physical power. And then these guys, they put in delegates upon delegates upon delegates, and this was structured in a militaristic formulation. And this became what was called the Central Committee. And these elections were militaristic, but they represented the masses themselves. And it didn't involve, bureaucrats. It didn't involve elderly politicians. It didn't involve nobility or anything like that. No, it was instead workers and soldiers. And these people were known by the workers and soldiers, known directly and personally. Back to the text. The character of the Commune. The centralized state machinery, which, with its ubiquitous and complicated military, bureaucratic, clerical, and judiciary organs, entoils and meshes the living civil society like a boa constrictor, was first forged in the days of absolute monarchy as a weapon of the nascent modern society in its struggle of emancipation from feudalism. The seigneurial privileges of the medieval lords and cities and clergy were transformed into attributes of a unitary state power, displacing the feudal dignitaries by salaried state functionaries, transferring the arms from medieval retainers of the landlords and the corporations of townish citizens to a standing army, substituting for the checkered, varicolored anarchy of conflicting medieval powers the regulated plan of a state power with a systematic and hierarchic division of labor. Thanks for coming, Elvin. I'll see you later. The first French Revolution, with its task to found national unity, to create a nation, had to break down all local, territorial, townish, and provincial independence. It was, therefore, forced to develop what absolute monarchy had commenced, the centralization or organization of state power, and to expand the circumference and the attributes of the state power, the number of its tools, its independence, and even its supernatural sway of real society, which in fact took the place of the medieval supernaturalist heaven with its saints. Every minor solitary interest engendered by the relations of social groups was separated from society itself, fixed and made independent from it, and opposed to it in the form of state interests, and ministered by state priests, with exactly determined hierarchical functions. This parasitical excrescence upon civil society, pretending to be its ideal counterpart, grew to its full development under the sway of the Bourse Bonaparte. The Restoration and the monarchy of July added nothing to it but a grayer division of labor, growing at the same measure in which the division of labor within civil society created new groups of interests, and therefore new material for state action. In their struggle against the Revolution of 1848, the Parliamentary Republic of France and the governments of all continental Europe were forces strengthened, with their measures of repression against the popular movement, the means of action, and the centralization of that governmental power. All revolutions thus only perfected the state machinery, instead of throwing off this deadening incubus. The fractions and parties of the ruling classes which alternately struggled for supremacy considered the occupancy, control, seizure, the direction of this immense machinery of government as the main booty of the victor. It centered on the creation of immense standing armies, the hosts of state vermin, and huge national debts. During the time of the absolute monarchy, it was a means of the struggle of modern society against feudalism. Crowned by the French Revolution and under the French Bonaparte, it served not only to subjugate the revolution and annihilate all popular liberties. It was an instrument of the French Revolution to strike abroad, to create for France on the continent, instead of feudal monarchies, more or less states after the image of France. Under the Restoration and the Monarchy of July, it became not only a means of the forcible class domination of the middle class, but a means of adding to the direct economic exploitation, a second exploitation of the people by assuring to their middle class families all the rich places of the state household. During the time of the revolutionary struggle of 1848, at last it served as a means of annihilating that revolution and all aspirations at the emancipation of the popular masses. But the state parasite received only its last development during the Second Empire. The governmental power with its standing army, its all-directing bureaucracy, its stultifying clergy, and its servile tribunal hierarchy had grown so independent of society itself that a grotesquely mediocre adventurer with a hungry band of desperados behind him sufficed to wield it. It did no longer want the pretext of an armed coalition of old Europe against the modern world founded by the Revolution of 1789. It appeared no longer as a means of class domination, subordinate to its parliamentary ministry or legislature, humbling it under its sway even the interests of the ruling classes, whose parliamentary show work it supplanted by self-elected corps legislatives and self-paid senates, sanctioned in its absolute sway by universal suffrage, the acknowledged necessity for keeping up order, that is, the rule of the landowner, the capitalist over the producer, cloaking under the tatters of masquerade of the past the orgies of the corruption of the present, and the victory of the parasite fraction, the financial swindler, the debauchery of all the reactionary influences of the past let loose, a pandemonium of infamies. The state power had received its last and supreme expression in the Second Empire. Apparently, the final victory of this governmental power over society. It was in fact the orgy of all the corrupt elements of that society. To the eye of the uninitiated, it appeared only as a victory of the executive over the legislative, as a final defeat of the form of class rule pretending to be the autocracy of society by its form pretending to be a superior power to society. But in fact, it was only the last degraded and only possible form of that class ruling, as humiliating to those classes themselves as to working classes which they kept fettered by it. That is a long-ass paragraph, and it doesn't get better. Great. We're going to see if we can get through this section, so we're going to push forward. The 4th of September was only the revindication of the Republic against the grotesque adventure that had assassinated it. The true antithesis to the empire itself, that is, the state power, the centralized executive, of which the Second Empire was only the exhausting formula, was a commune. This state power forms, in fact, the creation of the middle class, first as a means to break down feudalism, then as a means to crush the emancipatory aspiration of the producers of the working class. All reactions and all revolutions had only served to transfer that organized power, the organized force of the slavery of labor, from one hand to the other, from one fraction of the ruling classes to the other. It had served the ruling classes as a means of subjugation and of pelf. It had sucked new forces from every new change. It had served as the instrument of breaking down every popular rise, and it had served to crush the working classes after they had fought and been ordered to secure its transfer from one part of its oppressors to the other. Footnote. Rising. Okay. This was, therefore, a revolution not against this or that legitimate, constitutional, republican, or imperialist form of state power. It was a revolution against the state itself, of this supernaturalist abortion of society, a resumption by the people for the people of its own social life. It was not a revolution to transfer it from one fraction of the ruling classes to the other, but a revolution to break down this horrid machinery of class domination itself. It was not one of those dwarfish struggles between the executive and the parliamentary forms of class domination, but a revolt against both of these forms, integrated each other, in which the parliamentary form was only the most deceitful bywork of the executive. The Second Empire was the final form of the state usurpation. Commune was its definite negation, and therefore the initiation of the social revolution of the 19th century. Whatever, therefore, its fate at Paris, it will make a trip round the world. It was once acclaimed by the working class of Europe and the United States as the magic word of delivery. The glories of the antediluvian deed to the Prussian conquerors seem only hallucinations of a bygone past. So I am going to do a quick copy, and then we're going to do another copy. Down to here. Okay. Continuing. It was only the working class that could formulate by the word, quote, commune, and initiated by the fighting Commune of Paris, this new aspiration. Even the last expression of that state power by the Second Empire, although humbling for the pride of the ruling classes and casting to the winds their parliamentary pretensions of self-government, had been only the last possible for their class rule. While politically dispossessing them, it was the orgy under which all the economic and social infamies of the regime got full sway. The middling bourgeoisie and the petty middle class were by their economic conditions of life excluded from initiating a new revolution and induced to follow in the track of the ruling classes, to become the followers of the working class. The peasants were the passive economical base of the Second Empire, of that last triumph of a state separate of and independent from society. Only the proletarians, fired by new social tasks accomplished by them for all society, to do away with all classes and class rule, were the men to break that instrument of class rule, the state, the centralized and organized governmental power usurping to be the master instead of the servant of society. In the active struggle against them by the ruling classes, supported by the passive adherence of the peasantry, the Second Empire, the last crowning at the same time as the most signal prostitution of the state, which had taken the place of the medieval church, had been engendered. It had sprung into life against them. By them it was broken, not as a peculiar form of government, centralized power, but as its most powerful expression, elaborated into seeming independence from society, and therefore also its most prostitute reality, covered by infamy from top to bottom, having centered in absolute corruption at home and absolute powerlessness abroad. But this one form of class rule had only broken down to make the executive, the governmental state machinery, the great and single object of attack to the revolution. Parliamentarism in France had come to an end. Its last term in full sway was a parliamentary republic from May 1848 to the coup d'etat. The emperor that killed it was its own creation. And the empire with its core legislative and senate. In this form, it had been reproduced in the military monarchies of Prussia and Austria. It had been a mere farce, a mere bywork of despotism in its crudest form. Parliamentarism was dead in France, and the workmen's revolution certainly was not to awaken it from its death. The Commune, the reabsorption of the state power by society as its own living forces instead as forces controlling and subduing it, by the popular masses themselves, forming their own force instead of the organized force of their suppression. The political form of their social emancipation, instead of the artificial force appropriated by their oppressors, their own force opposed to and organized against them. A society wielded for their oppression by their enemies. The form was simple like all great things. The reaction of foreign revolutions, the time wanted for all historical developments, and the past always lost in revolutions in the very days of popular triumph, whenever it had rendered its victorious arms to be turned against itself, first by displacing the army of the National Guard. All right, so it displaced the armies of the National Guard. And there's a footnote. In the German translation, the sentence reads, as against previous revolutions in which the time necessary for all historical development always got lost, in which, the very first days of popular triumph, as soon as the people had laid down their victorious arms, they were turned against the people themselves. The Commune first of all replaced the army by the National Guard. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, continuing. Quote, for the first time since the 4th September, the Republic is liberated from the government of its enemies. It gives to the city a national militia to defend the citizens against the power of the government, instead of a permanent army that defends the government against the citizens. Proclamation of the Central Committee of 22nd March. And there's a footnote here, quote, it appeared in the form of a government ordinance that was also printed in the Journal Officiel de la République Française on March 25th, 1871. End quote. The people had only to organize this militia on a national scale to have done away with the standing armies. This is the first economical condition sine qua non for all social improvements. Discarding at once the source of taxes and the state debt, and this constant danger to government usurpation of class rule, the regular class rule, or an adventure pretending to save all classes. Okay, so in other words, get rid of the standing army. At the same time, the safest guarantee against foreign aggression and making it, in fact, a costly military apparatus impossible in all other states. The emancipation of the peasant from the blood tax and from being the most fertile source of all state taxation and state debts. 1 second. Here's already the point in which Commune is a luck for the peasant, the first word of his emancipation. With the independent police abolished and its ruffians supplanted by servants of the Commune, the general suffrage, till now abused either for the parliamentary sanction of the holy state power or as a play in the hands of the ruling classes, only employed by the people of sanction, choose the instruments of parliamentary class rule once in many years, that is to say elections, but plaything, is adapted to its real purposes, to choose by the communes their own functionaries of administration and initiation. So we're going to put that in. Dispelled is the delusion as if administration and political governing were mysteries, transcendent functions only to be trusted to the hands of a trained caste. State parasites, richly paid sycophants, and sinecurists in the highest posts, absorbing the intelligence of the masses and turning them against themselves in the lower places of the hierarchy. Okay, dispelled is delusion as if administration. So, in other words, workers can now be in charge. Doing away with the state hierarchy altogether and replacing the haughtiest masters of the public of the people into always removable servants, a mock responsibility by a real responsibility, as they act continuously under public supervision. Paid like skilled workmen, £12 a month, the highest salary not exceeding €240 a year. Salary somewhat more than one-fifth, according to great scientific authority Professor Huxley, to satisfy a clerk for the Metropolitan School Board. Okay. The whole sham of state mysteries and state pretensions was done away with by a commune, mostly consisting of simple working men organizing the defense of Paris, carrying war with the praetorians of Bonaparte, securing the approvisionment supply of that immense town, following all the posts hitherto divided between government, police, and prefecture, doing their work publicly, simply under the most difficult and complicated circumstances, and doing it, as Milton did in his Paradise Lost, for a few pounds, acting in broad daylight with no pretensions to infallibility, not hiding itself behind circumlocution offices, not ashamed to confess blunders by correcting them, making one order the public functions, military, administrative, political, real workmen's functions, instead of the hidden attributes of a trained caste, keeping order in the turbulence of civil war and revolution, initiating measures of general regeneration. Okay. That is a very good quote right there. Whatever merits of the single measures of the Commune, its greatest measure was its own organization, exemplarized with the foreign enemy at one door and the class enemy at the other, proving by its life its vitality, confirming its thesis by its action. Its appearance was a victory over the victors of France. Captive Paris resumed by one bold spring of the leadership of Europe, not depending on brute force, but by taking the lead of the social movement, by giving body to the aspirations of the working class of all countries. With all the great towns organized into communes after the model of Paris, no government could repress the movement by sudden or surprise or sudden reaction. Even by this preparatory step at the time of incubation, the guarantee of the movement came. All France would be organized into self-working and self-governing communes, the standing army replaced by popular militias, the army of state parasites removed, the clerical hierarchy displaced by the schoolmaster, the state judge transformed into communal organs, the suffrage for the national representation, not a manner of sleight of hand for an all-power government, but the deliberate expression of organized communes, the state functionaries reduced to a few functions for general national purposes. Such is a commune, the political form of the social emancipation, of the liberation of labor from the usurpations, slaveholding, of the monopolists of the means of labor, created by the laborers themselves or forming the gifts of nature. As the state machinery and parliamentarism are not the real life of the ruling classes, but only the organized general organs of their domination, the political guarantees and forms and expressions of the old order of things. So the commune is not the social movement of the working class, and therefore of a general regeneration of mankind, but the organized means of action. The commune does not do away with the class struggles, through which the working class strive for the abolition of all classes, and therefore of all class rule. Because it does not represent a peculiar interest, it represents the liberation of labor. That is fundamental and natural condition of individuals in social life, which only by usurpation, fraud, and artificial contrivances can be shifted from the few upon the many, but affords a rational medium in which that class struggle can run its different phases in the most rational and humane way. It would start violent reactions as violent revolutions. It begins the emancipation of labor, its great goal, by doing away with the unproductive and mischievous work of state parasites, by cutting away the springs which sacrifice an immense portion of the natural produce to the feeding of the state monster on the one side, by doing on the other the real work of administration, local and national, for working men's wages. It begins, therefore, with the immense saving with economical reform as well as political transformation. Just going to take that entire thing there. The communal organization, once firmly established on a national scale, the catastrophes it might still have to undergo would be sporadic slaveholders' insurrections, which, while for a moment interrupting the work of peaceful progress, would only accelerate the movement by putting the sword in the hands of the social revolution. The working class know that they have to pass through different phases of class struggle. They know that the superseding of the economic conditions of the slavery of labor by the condition of free and associated labor can only be the progressive work of time, the economical transformation, that they require not only a change of distribution, but a new organization of production, or rather the delivery, setting free, of the social forms of production in the present organized labor, engendered by present industry, from the trammels of slavery, from their present class character, and their harmonious national and international coordination. They know that this work of regeneration will be again and again relented, footnote, retarded or slowed, impeded by the resistance of vested interests and class egotisms. They know that the present, quote, spontaneous action of the natural laws of capital and private property, end quote, can only be superseded by, quote, the spontaneous action of the laws and social economy of free and associated labor, end quote, by a long process of development of new conditions, as was the, quote, spontaneous action of the economic laws of slavery, end quote, and the, quote, spontaneous action of the economic laws of serfdom, end quote. But they know at the same time that great strides may again be made at once through the communal form of political organization, and that the time has come to begin that movement for themselves and mankind. And that's where we're going to leave off. We finally hit the stuff that we are looking for. We've got a lot of really good stuff, and we will be able to get through this last bit in our next session. With that said, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you everybody who happens to be listening to this, and have a great night.